Welcome to Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I'm Greg Bluestein here with Patricia Murphy. What's up, Patricia?
Hey, Greg.
You ready for this last stretch?
I'm ready for, is this the last stretch? I think this is the beginning of the end of the first stretch.
The beginning
Let's
of the
not get
end.
ahead of ourselves.
I'm already ready for the next.
I'm kidding.
Jon Ossoff has become one of the Democratic Party's biggest rising stars. He's drawing massive crowds, raising eye-popping sums of money, and generating the kind of national buzz that inevitably leads to another question. If he wins this election, what comes next? Some Democrats have already floated him as a future presidential contender, but Ossoff recently moved quickly to shut down that speculation. We're going to talk about what he said, why he said it, and what it reveals about his political priorities heading into one of the most closely watched Senate races in the nation. Then in our second segment, the Republican runoffs are entering yet another new phase as contenders are trying to rev up their supporters and win votes from candidates who did not make it to the runoff. Let's get into it. Patricia, I think you wrote the definitive column about Jon Ossoff's potential presidential aspirations with really the first and most definitive on-the-record comment from him saying, guys, I'm not running in 2028.
Yes. Now it's definitive until it's not. You know, this is the story unless and until he changes his mind. But I will say there has been all of this presidential buzz about Jon Ossoff ever since he started to do his public campaigns. His speeches have been extremely viral. There will be inevitably 4 or 5 clips that just rage across the internet because Democrats feel like they have found in Jon Ossoff somebody who knows how to talk about President Trump, knows how to go on the offensive, but also layer in a connection to sort of the origins of the country, the spirit of the nation, why it's also wrong, connect it to a larger issue of corruption. And so they feel like, God, this guy has got it. He knows what he's doing. Let's have him run for president. And so my column, first of all, was to hear from Jon Ossoff directly to say, hey, a lot of people want you to run for president. What do you think about that? And then also to kind of dig into why he feels that way. So on the record, Jon Ossoff told me I have zero interest in running for president in 2028. He calls it fantasy football of Democrats to start this sort of chattering moment of like, maybe it should be Ossoff, maybe it should be Josh Shapiro from Pennsylvania. They're both battleground states. Gavin Newsom out in California. He said, this is crazy. He went on to say his focus is on 2026 and as some backstory, and the reason he feels as strongly as he does about 2026 and getting through this election is that Democrats have come close and missed it. They've come close and won, but this is not a state the Democrats can take for granted. You can't just say, okay, you're going to win in 26, and then let's talk about what happens next. And so he wants Democrats to be focused. He is focused. He doesn't even sound like he wants to run for president, to be honest with you. But we'll see what happens. We'll get there when we get there.
Yeah, and we've known him for more than a decade now, it feels like. Yeah, about a decade or so. He's always been something of an introvert. He certainly isn't the one who wants to always look for the next TV camera. We've never had really a problem with access to him in the local media, but he's not someone who's going to be on MS Now or CNN or you name it every night in Washington. He is much more family focused. When he's in Atlanta, he is hanging out with his wife and his 2 kids a lot, right? And they're very private, right? He keeps his family life very, very personal for good reason. So he doesn't necessarily, it doesn't jump off, it does not exude, I want to be the next president like others do. And,
Yes.
The other day I was talking to some Ossoff allies and we were talking about Stacey Abrams because at this stage, in 2022 and 2020, she was openly talking about running for president. And, she's saying it shouldn't be anything we're ashamed of. If you want to be president one day, go out and say it. Remember, like when there was all this talk about whether or not she could be a running mate for Joe Biden, she was like, yeah, of course I could be. I'm accomplished, I'm talented, I'm smart. So her argument was basically that candidates should go out and say it if they want it. Jon Ossoff doesn't seem to really want it. Now, could he be recruited? Could something
If Barack
change?
Obama says we need you, is he really going to say no? But there are a couple pieces to this. There's the personal piece that you mentioned. His daughters are 4 and 1 years old. His youngest just turned 1 on last Saturday. He blocks time out off of his schedule. He is also the first senator I have ever seen take paternity leave. He is a kind of a millennial involved dad. And to imagine him spending 6 months in Iowa the way you have to really be considered for the nomination for the Democrats, and going out to every Saturday night Democratic fish fry and, state party, this and that, all over the country. It just feels like he is so much more focused on his kids. His wife also is an OBGYN. Like, she's kind of the power in the power couple, if you ask anybody. Not personally, but she's just a very accomplished woman. I don't see him leaving that on the shelf to go to New Hampshire 10 times. It just doesn't feel like that. So that's the personal piece of it. And then the political thing, this reminds me a lot of when Brian Kemp was talked about as a presidential candidate, and maybe that'll happen too. We don't know. But Jon Ossoff is not doing the things to run for president that you need to be doing to run for president. Yeah. He does not have the big national fundraiser, although he has a huge list from 2021. We have to say that. He's not going anywhere besides Georgia. He rarely does national TV interviews except when he's doing it strategically. And so that the political piece isn't there either. And then we have to talk about the 2022 race for Senator Warnock to have an understanding of why Jon Ossoff is like, Democrats, hold your horses. Like, we have a job to do.
Yeah. And to be clear, he's going to do more national TV because it helps him raise money. That's just part of what being a Democratic candidate in a place like Georgia is. He's going to get a lot more national attention. We saw sort of the New York Times response to your column a couple of days ago this week saying that basically making the case for
Here's
Jon
why
Ossoff
he should run for president.
To run for president, noting that, of course, he's downplayed and dismissed that idea, but saying essentially if he gets recruited, how could he say no? So there are some very powerful voices out there pushing him to at least consider it in 2028. First, of course, he has to get past this election. And even though we've talked on the show and we've written and we've discussed, and it's been part of the dialogue about this race, how Republicans are very, very nervous. They're very concerned. They view Jon Ossoff as one of the most formidable candidates, Democrats, period. It's also Georgia. Yeah. It is also the same state where Herschel Walker, with all of his baggage, with all the controversies, with all the scandals that plagued his campaign, still forced Senator Raphael Warnock, who ran basically a pretty flawless campaign, a few errors, but nothing that would really hobble him, still forced him to run off. So this is still a very close competitive state. And Jon Ossoff is focused on winning this state first before he even thinks about the whole presidential talk.
Yeah. So Senator Warnock, already by then, the longtime senior pastor at Ebenezer Baptist Church, had the black vote out for him in massive numbers. Against Herschel Walker, he finished 1 point ahead of Herschel Walker after Herschel Walker, 6 months previously, revealed 3 children that we didn't know about, multiple abortions that we didn't know about from previous relationships, would go on very bizarre sort of diatribes during his own campaign events. There was a very famous one about him saying, sort of debating between the benefits of who would win, a vampire or a werewolf. And it sort of just trickled out from there. And he still almost beat Raphael Warnock in the November contest. It went to a runoff, and Senator Warnock won by 3 points. But that was a squeaker when you get out your calculator. And so Ossoff doesn't have a Herschel Walker to run against. He's either going to have Derek Dooley or Mike Collins, who will have the full backing. One of them will have the full backing of the White House at some point. The Trump White House has raised hundreds of millions of dollars for these races. And so Ossoff is really saying, like, I'm okay, I'm flattered, but come on, like, don't take your eye off the ball.
Yeah, and Ossoff also doesn't have Senator Warnock on the ballot with him.
That's right.
In this race either. And in Georgia, the backbone, the beating heart of the Democratic coalition, of course, is black voters, particularly black women voters. But black voters are the bulk of the Democratic electorate in Georgia. And I remember doing the runoff campaign, I think, if not all, almost all of Jon Ossoff's ads were all aimed at energizing black voters to vote for him as well as Warnock. And in this race, it's really interesting because, of course, Warnock is not on the ballot, but Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms is. And we've talked a lot on the show and in the AJC's digital pages about the alliance that they're forming and how it's not necessarily the norm in Georgia politics for candidates running for statewide office even from the same party, to be kind of tethering themselves to each other. But in this case, there's obviously benefits for Mayor Bottoms, but there's also those benefits for Jon Ossoff as he's looking to win a second term, hoping to energize the same Black voters who came out in force for Keisha Lance Bottoms.
Yeah, and he has, of course, like a huge appeal to Black voters, but he is not himself, does not have those long, deep relationships that Senator Warnock had and that Keisha Lance Bottoms has. So a portion of it will need to be transferable. Also, I think we need to look at the Trump factor here. I think people assume because this is a very Trump-unfriendly year, that will boost Ossoff. I think that's very likely because so much of what he says and so much of the role of a Democratic senator is to be a check and balance on the White House. However, in 2022, again, during that race between Senator Warnock and Herschel Walker, President Trump had already been indicted by a grand jury. He had already just come off of a global scandal of trying to overturn the Georgia election results. So our assumption was, wow, anybody endorsed by Trump is going down, especially after Governor Kemp performed so well against his own challenger from President Trump. But Herschel Walker just defied all of that. And I just have learned after a lot of wrong predictions not to make predictions in the state, not to make assumptions either. Ossoff looks very strong, lots of money. I called him J.B. Pritzker in a JFK package. The blogosphere, the bulwark leaders cannot get enough of looking at Jon Ossoff and listening to Jon Ossoff. They have quite literally fallen in love with this man. But there's just the cold math of a state that is dominated by Republican leaders, statewide elected officials, top to bottom, county Republican officials in the significant majority of the counties in Georgia. So it remains not just competitive, but like a little lean Republican generically, and Ossoff has to overcome that.
Yeah, and look, he also knows that whoever emerges from the Republican runoff is going to paint him as a puddle jumper, as a stepping stoner, right? As someone who wants to end up in the White House, and voters who don't want to see that one day can stop him right here and all that, right? Certainly that argument was one of the arguments Republicans made against Stacey Abrams. Frankly, it was one of the arguments Republicans made against Jason Carter way back in 2014 when he ran for governor. It was, hey, if you can stop him now, you can stop him from trying to become
This is our last chance.
This is our last chance. And guess what? I mean, it kind of, it's a lot harder to win after to run for president after you're defeated in a statewide race than it is after you win a statewide race.
Now, Greg, before we get out of this segment, I don't think he's going to run for president. Do you think he's going to run for president?
So I don't. He's also 39.
Yeah.
We could be talking about him running in 2040.
He could run in 50 years based on the past choices.
But what I was going to ask you too about, because I went into this cycle thinking that by now there'd be a ton of buzz about another Georgia senator running for president, Raphael Warnock, and not as much buzz about Jon Ossoff. But Jon Ossoff has sort of upended that to the point where even after his last rally, I was out of town, so I couldn't be there. I know you were there, but I was texting some of his folks saying, well, good luck with all the new president 2028 stuff, because I knew I was watching it from afar from my bike in Hilton Head, listening to it while I was biking around with my kiddos. But I was like, okay, this is only going to stoke it, even more. But I really thought we'd be talking about Senator Warnock, and he has done some of those things. He has his own reelection to worry about in 2028. So if he decides to run for a second term, thirdish term, that will be, that will decide whether or not he's even in the conversation. But he went to Minneapolis after the ICE raids. He's been on national TV a lot more. Of course, he has the pulpit of Martin Luther King Jr.'s historic church. He's been one of the loudest voices documenting and chronicling and sort of leading the counterattacks against the Supreme Court ruling that weakened the Voting Rights Act. So I thought there'd be a lot more about what Raphael Warnock.
Yeah, I think it's a function of the fact that Ossoff is doing these rallies, that he's so much more visible than Warnock right now. But there is a greater than 0% chance, there's a decent chance that in a 2032, if both of these men have run again and won their races, I mean, two of the leading candidates for Democrats could both be the Georgia senators. Again, if Ossoff gets through this race, this is the kind of talk he doesn't approve of.
No.
Doesn't want to hear. But they both have the kind of the runway. They have the appeal to Democratic voters. And Democrats are just so totally lost for a leader. They don't know what to do with themselves. They have not found their perfect flavor. And both Ossoff and Warnock have so much appeal and so many of the attributes that they're looking for generically. And then here it is right here in one state.
Here it is. Okay, let's take a quick break. When we come back, Buddy Carter's out of the race and his voters are up for grabs. Mike Collins and Derek Dooley are working hard to win them over before June 16th. And look, there's also a few also-rans in the Republican race for governor that Burt Jones and Rick Jackson would love to snap up. We'll break down who has the edge. This is Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Welcome back to Politically Georgia. Greg Bluestein here with Patricia Murphy. If you've got a question you'd like to ask us here on Politically Georgia, you can call our hotline anytime, day or night, leave a question, and we'll play it back and answer your question right here on the show during our Monday mailbag segment. The number is 770-810-5297. You can also email us at politicallygeorgia, all one word, at ajc.com or patricia.murphy@ajc.com. Executive producer Shaney B and his legion of interns is standing by to take your messages. And I've got news for you, Patricia. We've got two of those interns here in studio with us today.
I can't believe you guys are here. This is so exciting. How are those emails coming? Are you guys getting a lot of them?
My email buzzes all the time.
And introduce yourselves.
We'd love to hear it.
My name is Andre Butso. I'm a breaking news intern this summer.
And Georgia State student as well.
Georgia State student, rising senior.
There you go. And Sophia?
My name is Sophia Epley. I am a politics intern, and I'm a recent graduate from the University of Georgia.
Go Dogs.
Awesome.
You've already seen Andre's byline. You're about to see Sophia's byline a lot. Sophia's on the politics team. Andre's on the breaking news team. They're all going to be helping to cover the next few weeks of political mayhem in Georgia.
And they're not just answering the emails, but keep them coming. And we have to give a Go Panthers also.
Yes,
Panthers.
Exactly. Go Panthers. I'm such a UGA homer. I've got to get over
When it's time to talk about the Commodores, we'll do it. Greg.
There we go. The Republican Senate runoff is now just days away. And one of the biggest questions in the race is what happens to Buddy Carter's voters. The congressman fell short of making the runoff, but he still captured a sizable share of the vote, especially down in Southeast Georgia and in the metro Atlanta suburbs. Now both Derek Dooley and Mike Collins are racing to win over his supporters before June 16th. We've got brand new audio from Derek Dooley making his pitch directly to that block of voters. We're going to break down what he's saying, why Carter supporters could be decisive, and how both campaigns are trying to build a winning coalition in this final stretch. Shaney B, let's listen to Derek Dooley. This was Derek Dooley at a, where was it? It was at a breakfast place, Jay Christopher's in Sandy Springs. So like it's bluish area now, but it's still home to a sizable number of Republicans.
We've been down to Buddy's district quite a bit, but it doesn't mean we're neglecting everywhere else, because everywhere is important. Even if they voted for us before, we need to get them to show up. That's why we're continuing our ground game, county by county, voter by voter.
So Patricia also noted that something like 8,000 Fulton County voters still voted for Buddy Carter, the Savannah congressman, and many more down in the 1st District. So those voters, Buddy Carter has not endorsed anyone. Those voters are completely up for grabs right now.
Yeah, and we have to kind of think about who are the Buddy Carter voters. He came out very strongly right out of the gate, called himself a MAGA warrior, and then Mike Collins adopted that phrase. Absolutely no question. He was pro-Trump. He introduced the bill to rename Greenland Red, White, and Blue Land, which I thought was ridiculous, but that's what he did. But before he was the current Buddy Carter, he was also a bit more moderate, more of a traditional. He was the former mayor of Pooler, more mainstream Republican, actually acknowledges climate change and the role that people play in solving it, if not causing it. And so he was not the MAGA warrior. And so we need to find out, and we will learn who these Buddy Carter voters are. Are they voting for pre-2026 Buddy Carter, or are they voting for the MAGA warrior? And that will make a huge difference in if those voters choose to go back to the polls, and they absolutely should, Are they going to go for another MAGA warrior? Or are they going to go for somebody who feels a little bit more like a traditional mainstream Republican, who is Derek Dooley?
And we're talking a significant number of voters.
Yes.
25% or so of the Republican electorate back in the primary voted for Buddy Carter. Doing the race, it was interesting because, he had this reputation as a more mainstream, even moderate Republican over his career in the state legislature before he became a member of Congress. And I think he was a mayor of Pooler even before that. So a long, long track record in Southeast Georgia, Patricia. Then he went, all in on the MAGA base sort of side of the electorate, which is sort of the way most Republicans are running for office. He's not alone in that sort of sense. But during the campaign, him and Mike Collins went after. I mean, at one point, one of the debates, Mike Collins was like, "Buddy is not your buddy." I mean, they did not play nice at all. Mike Collins would sort of his campaign team, his campaign accounts would needle Buddy Carter, make fun of his height, make fun of gaps in his, if he had a gaffe or something like that, exploit that, try to do all that. Whereas Derek Dooley pretty much laid off him most of the campaign. And we were both at his primary party, and he made a very outright appeal to Buddy Carter's supporters there.
Yeah, he also praised Buddy Carter and thanked him for his service to the country, called him a good man. And certainly that jumped right out at me. And also it's just the kind of tone that Derek Dooley has been setting. It's the kind of tone that Buddy Carter had prior to this campaign, frankly. Although he never got super, super nasty. But that is the very overt appeal to those Buddy Carter voters. Not just, I like the guy that you guys like too, but also I am the kind of person that you would feel comfortable with representing you in the Senate.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, watching how Democrats are responding to this as well. Because we know Jon Ossoff's, his 2020 campaign was essentially based on casting David Perdue and the rest of the Republican elite as corrupt. He's doing the same exact thing in this campaign as well, saying that whoever emerges of the Republicans, they're both corrupt, they're both Trump puppets. So there's not really an effort by Democrats to put their thumb on the scale of either campaign. There's some argument that they'd rather see Mike Collins. There's some argument that they'd rather see Derek Dooley. We've seen Democrats promote campaign hits on both of them. Mike Collins, of course, it's the ethics allegations we've talked and discussed and written a lot about, as well as Brandon Phillips, his former top aides, gaffes on social media, and just his general campaign approach we've talked a lot about as well. For Derek Dooley, there is this sort of late story about alleged corruption involving the governor and Derek Dooley's brother, Daniel Dooley, that Jon Ossoff has invoked on the campaign trail as well. And Democrats are surely going to keep on invoking if Derek Dooley is the nominee. It's a big if. We don't know how this will play out, but we also know that Derek Dooley feels like he has more of an uphill battle primarily because Mike Collins was the leading vote getter.
Yeah, so when all the votes were counted, Mike Collins came in at 40.5%, Derek Dooley back at 30.2%. He has a lot of ground to make up. Now, if he got the lion's share of those Buddy Carter voters, he would win. He would beat Mike Collins pretty handily. And so he needs those voters to come back out. There's no guarantee. They're like, I voted. I don't, is there really another election coming? I don't know. So he needs to not just get them to come out, but also to vote for him. But you're right. Ossoff has said in his most recent rally, he literally said, it doesn't matter which Republican wins. They're the same person. One of them is a congressman because his daddy was a congressman. And the other one was a football coach because his daddy was a coach. And so completely dismissive of them both and really showing that he is ready to go up against either one of them. Truthfully, I think they'd rather go up against Derek Dooley because he does not have a congressional record to slice and dice. There have been a lot of votes, pro-Trump votes, that I think the Ossoff team thinks they would be able to make a lot of hay with. Mike Collins also has a long trail of tweets and social media posts that will be problematic in a general election. They may not be the deciding factor, but it would give a Democratic campaign and a national Democratic campaign a lot to work with. But I think Ossoff also doesn't want to reveal his hand too soon and say, oh, I sure hope it's not Mike Collins. I mean, I hope it's not Derek Dooley. So, he's saying they're basically the same person.
Yeah. And of course, one thing we're also still watching is the Trump factor. The president still is on the sidelines in this race. we had heard all sorts of hot and heavy rumors weeks ago that the president could be on the verge of making a decision. We saw a number of endorsements in other states come out, not in this one yet. It's not, I wouldn't say it's too late to count out because he could do it the day of the runoff. He could do it the night before. We know from Georgia history that he has come in late before because look back at 2018, 6 days before the runoff, President Trump endorsed Brian Kemp over Casey Cagle in that gubernatorial runoff. So it's not too late for the president to weigh in, but it is getting later. And we have no idea whether or not he will get in. We do know in the governor's race, of course, he endorsed Burt Jones very, very early. And Patricia, that contest, there's also the competition for the other votes. Yes. 1/4 of the other votes, about 11% or so went for Attorney General Chris Carr, about 14 or 15% went for Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, both very mainstream, very kind of old guard Republicans. And both Burt Jones and Rick Jackson would love to have some of their supporters.
Absolutely. It's so interesting, though, to see the appeal, especially from the Jackson campaign to the Carr voters. So Chris Carr came in at about 12%, Brad Raffensperger at 15%. The appeal to the Carr voters is extremely overt. Chris Carr has endorsed Rick Jackson. Rick Jackson has run ads with that endorsement. He had previously run ads with Chris Carr talking about the idea of opening a state investigation into Burt Jones for corruption based on what we already know about the governor. So they have been, as a matter of fact, when I went to a Rick Jackson event, I walked in and about half of Chris Carr's old staff was just standing there. Mm-hmm. They'd been invited. They were there. They were participating. Some of them have actually gone to work for Rick Jackson. Yep. So it's a very clear straight line over to the Rick Jackson campaign. Now, with the Raffensperger voters, if either of these two campaigns directly appeals to Raffensperger voters, that will be seen as an affront to President Trump. And that will get President Trump to, I don't ever see Burt Jones doing that, but if Rick Jackson were to appeal directly to Brad Raffensperger voter, that could get the president more vocal in this because it really like flips a switch in the president's brain, it seems to, when Brad Raffensperger's name is invoked. I think there's a good chance he's investigating him right now to bring charges against him for his role in keeping the president from overturning the 2020 election. So Raffensperger is sort of a he who shall not be named and overt
but
appeals.
They still want their supporters.
They absolutely want their supporters. And when you sort of get into the minds of these supporters, those are the people who certainly did not support President Trump the last time around. With Chris Carr, it could kind of go either way. He was not a huge anti-Trumper, but he certainly didn't help the president in his appeals either. So it's it's much more nuanced with the Raffensperger voters, but the Jackson team is very clear that they would like all of those Carr voters. They like all the Raffensperger voters too, but that may have to happen more by kind of implied suggestion or osmosis, but not like, hey, Raffensperger voters.
I would be shocked if Raffensperger takes any sides in this race. Remember, Burt Jones has gone after him from the very get-go, from even before he got in this contest. But Rick Jackson, on day one, shortly after his surprise launch, he aired a digital ad essentially comparing Secretary of State Raffensperger to Judas, right?
Yes. So he's certainly not going to endorse.
So there's no love lost between them. Chris Carr, though, he's always sort of made his main focus, his main target, Burt Jones. It was no surprise at all when he endorsed Rick Jackson. And there was that telltale moment at their sole debate where Chris Carr from the stage said, if he wasn't running for governor as Attorney General, he would have already launched an investigation into Burt Jones. So that just shows you where his feelings, and I can tell you too, when those shadowy sort of secretive campaign ads came out, there's a lot of that were targeting Burt Jones. A lot of Burt Jones folks thought that it was somehow Chris Carr behind it. And Chris Carr was out there on the record, including on the show, saying, if I had $20 million.
And some people thought it might be Brad Raffensperger behind it because there's no love lost between Burt Jones and those two gentlemen. Again, when you look at the math, both Burt Jones and Rick Jackson finished under 40%. There is 26% of the vote out there with these previous voters. And that's the majority maker for both of these guys. We want to remind our listeners that if you voted in the Republican primary, you can vote in the runoff. If you voted nonpartisan or did not vote at all, you can vote in the Republican runoff. If you voted in the Democratic primary, you cannot vote in the Republican runoff. That's the only rule about these runoffs.
But you've got
and
your
vice
own
versa.
runoffs to vote for too. Down ticket.
Absolutely.
No for governor,
Yeah.
Senate. But
Pull
at
the
least you got-
Democratic ticket instead,
There
just
you
like
go.
you did.
Well, that's going to do it for today's edition of Politically Georgia. If you enjoyed what you heard, please follow, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform and share Politically Georgia with a friend. It really helps others find our show and join the conversation. We'll talk to you next time on the Politically Georgia podcast from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Thanks for listening to the Politically Georgia podcast. Our executive producer is Shane Backler. AJC's head of audio is Sam Stamler. Production support from our partners at Goat Rodeo, including Kara Schillen, Hazel Hoffman, and Max Johnston. For more of our political coverage, visit ajc.com/politicallygeorgia, and we invite you to support local journalism by subscribing to the AJC. Join us again next time on the Politically Georgia podcast from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution.